やるのか。組織のことは忘れて生きるはずじゃなかったのか。その銃をまた見ることになるとは。
ハリー・マクドウェルを止めてくれるのね。
ああ、奴らは最悪の亡霊を目覚めさせてしまった。組織の人間は一人残らず墓場に。
Gungrave is one of the most unique PS2 games I've ever played. It's by no means mechanically deep or complex or even incredible in any sort of ways. It's just fucking cool. It's in that weird middle ground of games like Blood Plus for me where I do like it a lot, but it's not gonna wow most people by any means. It's the kind of game that only certain people can genuinely appreciate the game for what it is. The biggest draw of the Gungrave series is the fact it's spearheaded by mangaka Yasuhiro Nightow, who's most known for creating Trigun and Blood Blockade Battlefront, which, if you're aware of Trigun in the first place, chances are that you already know about Gungrave. Gungrave was born from one of the developers at Studio Red Entertainment, coming up to Nightow during presumably E3, and asked him what kind of game he always wanted to make if there was one, and his answer would be Gungrave. Red Entertainment also being responsible for making games like Bujin Guy, Blood Bowl Tale, and most notably the Sakura Wars games. I'm not going to drag this intro out any longer and tell you the big history of Gungrave, as there's this fantastic video by BlueStigma where he covers the backstory and development of the Gungrave series, along with its adaptation and sequel. Double so with the fact that he actually owns the physical art book of Gungrave, which I can't really find any scans of online, sadly. This video is going to be focused on talking about the first two Gungrave games themselves, and occasionally bring up the anime when relevant for talking about certain story beats and differences. Since Overdose kind of expects you to have watched the anime to know certain characters and moments, which, when I played Overdose to record footage for this video for the first time, I didn't, and I had a much worse time with the game story because of that. That's not saying you're entirely left out of the dark if you haven't seen the anime, but there's this one particular character near the end of the game where if you haven't seen the anime, you will have no fucking idea what purpose they serve or how important they actually are to the story, which, when I played the game for the first time, I was completely fucking confused because I haven't seen the anime. As much as I do want to get into Overdose right now, since, fuck me, that's the title of the video, it only makes sense to start talking about the original Gungrave first. Promise, it won't be very long since the original game also isn't very long. So without further delay, here is
Gungrave.
Gungrave is an arcade-style third-person shooter where you play as an undead gunslinger known as Beyond the Grave, or just Grave for short. He set out to get revenge against Harry McDowell, the leader of a mafia group known as Millennium, or also referred to in-game as the Syndicate, or the organization as they're referred to in the anime for whatever reason. He accomplishes this with help from Dr. Tokioka and Mika Asagi. Gungrave is a simple premise with a simple revenge story that only really exists just to get the player from level to level, which isn't a bad thing at all. Lots of games are like that. But from what little there is, Gungrave's story is actually pretty good. It doesn't tell you everything, just leaving little bits and pieces of clues throughout the little cutscenes there are, or from whenever you talk to both Mika and Tokioka between levels, having you interpret what you think is actually happening in the world yourself. How's Gungrave as a game, though? Very simple. So simple, in fact, that there isn't really much to cover. The game has 3 difficulty options: normal, hard, and kick-ass. But really, no matter what difficulty you pick, the game is pretty easy. The only thing that makes the difficulties differ from each other is I think enemies do more damage the higher the difficulty, and on kick-ass you can't recover health. But as somebody who prides themselves on dedicating time to playing unknown, unheard of Japanese games, playing gems in a sea of media/content not in my native language, exploring the mystique and wonder of games from over yonder, engulfing myself in a different culture than my own. I can't understand any of this. I decided to play both the American and Japanese version of Gungrave to see if there was any differences at all. Spoiler alert, I wasted my fucking time. There is virtually Zero differences between these two versions. The only ones that I could notice is that the logo in the main menu is different, and instead of normal, hard, and kick-ass, it's just easy, normal, and hard. I'm not too sure why they got rid of the easy option for the US version. Initially, I thought that Japanese hard was American kick-ass, like a Metal Gear Solid 1 type deal, but on the Japanese version, you can heal on the hardest difficulty, and it felt easier than kick-ass did. That might just be due to me playing this game about 3 times now, so I know it a tiny bit better, but I couldn't tell. But how's the actual gameplay? It's fun! Like I said, it's an arcade-like third-person shooter where every level mostly consists of being large corridors with enemies coming from all sides, almost working like a shooting gallery. It's like if you took a game like Time Crisis but gave the player full control of your movement, giving you complete freedom to choose where you want to hold out, completely obliterating everything that stands in front of you. The coolest thing about this game is how destructive the environment is. You can destroy just about every single object in this game, and the more you destroy it, the more that adds to your combo meter, it being the main gimmick of the game. So basically, the more damage you cause to everything, the higher your combo meter goes. When you do get a higher combo counter, you fill up this gauge in the top left with a skull in it that gives you access to doing demolition shots. These being special moves you can do that can do insane damage to the environments, or insta-kill most enemies in the game, and they max out at 9 shots. You're able to select which one you want to use at a time in the pause menu, but after stage 4, the first 2 you get aren't really necessary, since the final 2 you get, Hellhound Roar and Raging Inferno, are just straight upgrades from the first 2. One neat thing is that during boss fights, once their health is low enough, the skull in your demolition shot meter will start glowing blue. And once you press the demolition shot button when it does, it allows you to do an insta-kill finisher on the boss. All of these look pretty fucking cool, but the main thing you're gonna be using in Gungrave is obviously your guns. Grave has dual-wielded magnums straight from the same guy who made Wolfwood's Cross, where you're able to rapidly fire them at a time when you're standing still, doing this sort of gun food type deal. Planting yourself in the middle of a room as enemies rush towards you is never not satisfying to do. It just looks so fucking cool. You can do this basically forever too, since you basically have 2 health bars. The blue bar being a weaker regenerating shield, and red obviously being your actual health bar. You can't regenerate your health normally in gameplay, but as I said before, you can use your demolition shot meter to heal yourself in the pause menu on any difficulty that isn't kick-ass. You're also able to fire your guns while walking, but you're much slower doing this. The game does have a run button, but you can't fire your guns while sprinting. However, if you click in the left thumbstick while walking forward, you're able to do this slight jog that allows you to fire while walking. Combine this with using L1 to lock on enemies and also giving you the ability to strafe, you can push forward much easier to keep your combo going longer at a time. Most enemies die quick enough to have you feel like an unstoppable powerhouse, which you basically are. You also have this melee attack bound to R1, which acts more as like a get off me kind of move, like when there's melee enemies running at you, or when you have moments of enemies clumped up in a small hallway. I'm not too sure where I can actually put this part in the video, but I think the coolest thing this game allows you to do is fully remap all the buttons on the controller. Granted, this isn't a very complex game that you're going to be doing crazy button combos for, but it still kind of shocked me, since I haven't seen too many games that allows you to fully remap your button like this, especially on PS2. It's really cool. I also completely fucking forgot to even mention this game's presentation. So to put it bluntly, this game looks fucking sick, dude. You can clearly tell this game had art done by the same guy who drew Trigun. This sick as hell looking comic book art style with mechanical designs done by Kosuke Fujishima, who also worked with Red Entertainment on the Sakura Wars games and the Tales of series. The mechanical designs go into the UI elements as well, which reminds you of how the old Guilty Gear games used to look in Accent Core and Xrd before they completely dropped it in Strive. Is it overly designed and maybe complex that could be hard to read? Sure, maybe, but it looks cool as shit, so I don't really fucking care. This has soul. The music is also fantastic, going for this kind of chaotic jazz style, all of it composed by Sueno Imahori, who did the soundtracks for the 1998 Trigun anime and Cowboy Bebop. This all culminates into making you think and realize, Fuck, this game is kinda cool, dude. Grave himself also having one of the rawest designs I've seen for any character in a game. This undead cowboy look who looks like he could be pulled straight out of Accent Core. And this motorcycle that he has, it looks like a fucking Hot Wheels car too. It just looks cool as shit, dude. There's 6 stages in the game, each starting and ending with a cutscene, and in between each stage, you're taken back to Tokioka's hideout where he gets new locations where each syndicate boss is. Here you can talk to both Tokioka and Mika to get more context to their backstory and what you're going to do. Learning more of the game's world and what Harry's been doing for all these years Grave's been dead. Talking to Mika, she actually tells you that she's Big Daddy's daughter, which explains why the syndicate is after her, since Harry wants all loose ends of Big Daddy and his wife, Maria, completely erased. Big Daddy being the previous boss of the syndicate. Mika actually knows of Grave, as he was a friend of Mika's mother. In the anime, they show that Grave and Maria actually used to be very close before he joined the Syndicate, where he dedicated himself entirely to his hitman job since he didn't want any harm coming to Maria. He was also good fishing buddies with Big Daddy back when he was still alive. That's not important at all, I just thought that was funny to bring up. At the end of each level, starting from stage 3 onwards, you fight one of the main syndicate bosses, almost all of them being considered superiors who are orcmen who can control themselves and their power, making for some really weird and cool designs that for the most part go to kinda boss fights. Except for one. Starting the 4th stage of the game, the Syndicate finds Tokioka's hideout, killing him and capturing Mika in the process. Grave promptly makes chase towards them, and after fighting all the goons down the subway station, you meet the man in charge who captured Mika. So now the boss fight begins where... But in the next cutscene, you see a man over Mika's body, still alive. After defeating that syndicate member and taking Mika back to the hideout, she mentions that a strange man rescued her after she was thrown out of the window and told her to tell Grave to meet him at the tower. One stage later, you finally meet the guy.
とうとうこんなことになっちまったな。あんたが消えてからも俺はあんたがやったように組織でやってきた。俺がこれからやることは全てあんたが叩き込んでくれたことだ。行くぜ。
Even without the context of watching the anime, you can tell that Bungie is just the coolest motherfucker ever. Kino-ass soundtrack, cold-ass fucking design, and he acts as a foil to Grave. The wolf would to your Vash, if you would. Bungie was Grave's disciple, back when he was still alive and in the Syndicate, and... oh, shit, I just beat him. Not to discount Bungie's fight, though. It's still cool. The arena looks great, the music is fantastic, and from what I can tell, he's the only boss in the game that can also do a demolition shot finisher on you. Bungie's cool as fuck. That's all I wanted to say, he's just fucking cool, dude. After defeating Bungie, you climb up the elevator to the top of the tower and finally get a cutscene explaining why Grave wants revenge against Harry. So it turns out that Grave, or Brandon, was actually best friends with Harry when he was alive. The two of them climbed the ladder of the Syndicate together, Harry being the guy who controls all of Millennium's finances, and Brandon being the hitman. The reason for Brandon's death was Harry wanted to kill the original boss of Millennium, Big Daddy, saying that he has something of a greater power that would make the Syndicate completely unstoppable, able to control the entire city, alluding to the Orgman you've been fighting the entire game. Brandon, who was devoted by the Syndicate's Code of Iron, didn't want to go with Harry's plan, so promptly, Harry shot him several times out of an elevator window. A weird difference is that in the game, Brandon just punches Harry after trying to leverage him with Maria, Big Daddy's wife, who was Brandon's girlfriend before they joined the Syndicate. But in the anime, Brandon actually pulls out a gun on Harry. Brandon dedicates himself strictly to following the Code of Iron in the Syndicate, that being, you have to kill a traitor no matter what, no matter who it is. Even though he does follow through with that without a fault, he couldn't bring himself to shoot Harry, as he's the entire reason why he's there. Harry and Brandon were as best of friends as you could get, but Harry didn't really see him that way anymore. After killing Brandon, he used his death as leverage and branded him as a traitor. All this extra context is just from the anime, though. The game does a decent job of just telling you what happened in a short amount of time. Again, giving you the cliff notes and just the basic context of what you need. Everything with the anime is just extra. But now that we reached the top of the tower, we can finally kill Harry. The final area looks really fucking cool, just a complete shift from how the rest of the game was like up until now. You're fighting these weird prototype Orcmen that are coming from these, like, floating artificial-looking hearts. The entire level reminds you of the final dungeon in Shin Megami Tensei 3. You finally get to the top to confront Harry, and as it turns out, Big Daddy's still alive! He ain't looking too good, though. After fighting him in a pretty annoying boss fight, he gets consumed by a giant alien head in another pretty annoying boss fight. Just stay locked on and run back as much as possible. Remember to click in the left thumbstick and strafe backwards. After one final demolition shot, you finally meet Harry face to face.
終わったか。やれよブランドン。今度はお前の番だ。さあ。
And that's Gungrave. After you beat the game, you do get a couple extras depending on what difficulty you're on, including a model viewer, stage selects, infinite demolition shots, and a cutscene viewer where you can watch this bizarre Jelly 2 bullshit. I don't know. This plays on one billboard in a single cutscene. I don't really know why it's included here, but it's cool. I also didn't notice this until after I beat the game the first time, but you can also turn on a rapid fire mode in the options menu if you don't want to spam square the entire time, which I would recommend, because this is the kind of game that gives your wrists a real fucking workout. All this coming out to a nice 1.5 hour long game in total, with sadly little to no replay value. Reading up on old reviews for this game, the biggest issue people had with it was its length, but I don't really see the problem with that. If this game was any longer than it would get old really fast. Oh, that's why you don't see 6-hour long light gun games. The game knows its strengths and it doesn't overstay its welcome. There's a lot of enjoyment to be had here though, whether you want to go for a higher score or just kill some time with something mindless. So yeah, I'd say Gungrave is great. I wouldn't have played this game 3 different times over 2 versions if I didn't think that. Great visuals, great style. I can't really bring myself to say I dislike or hate anything about this game. Good old time. Dare I say Kino. I went into Overdose expecting more of the same. Before going into it, I heard mixed things about it. Those who liked the game said it was a decent successor to the original Gungrave, and in some parts even better. But the people who really don't like Overdose don't like Overdose. I played it for about an hour or so, got kinda bored, then put it down for a couple weeks. I then suddenly had an urge to go back and at least finish the game. So I decided to go back, start a fresh new game, and I can safely say, after finishing it, this game fucking sucks. The most obvious difference with Overdose compared to the original is that it both looks and runs way fucking worse. The unique and beautiful looking manga art style is completely gone for a generic, kinda stylized anime look. The game's frame rate is cut in half from a 60 FPS to 30. On top of that, it also has a really shitty looking motion blur effect over every single character in the game, so every single encounter just looks so fucking choppy and bad, making everything just look like a total fucking blur. My only guess as to why they did this is another massive change they did to Overdose compared to the original. Gungrave was at the most a hour-and-a-half long game, with 6 stages in total, not being all too difficult. Gungrave didn't have much content packed into it, but that was never the point. Gungrave is meant to be akin to a rail shooter. The only difference is that you have full control over player movement. It was never meant to be more than that, and it knew that the gameplay couldn't hold for longer than it did, which is why the game was so short. Overdose tries to remedy this by making the game a grand total of 6 hours long with 9 stages, and overall being much more difficult. This wouldn't be a bad thing at all if the game had more depth and complexities with its gameplay, but it really doesn't. One of the bigger changes that Overdose made is that your movement speed is much faster and no longer has a sprint button, allowing you to strafe around enemies much easier without needing to click in the left thumbstick and firing at the same time. Now all you have to do is just lock on and fire. On the surface, this is a great change, but the game still has these weird pseudo-tank controls that the first game have, where if you move left instead of strafing, your character would just move forward and left at the same time along with the camera. It was weird in the first game, but it never really became much of an issue, because your default speed was always so slow, and you never needed to make any precise movements at all. On top of the fact, every level was basically a straight line. The whole point of the game was to find a spot, plant yourself there, and start firing away. In Overdose, it just feels weird because it still has those controls, but since you're faster, it always just feels so fucking weird to turn around a corner. Now, the answer to this would be the strafe, but remember that the lock-on button doubles as a strafe button. And also, no other fucking game on the planet controls like this. It just feels wrong. Also, somehow they made the lock-on in this game so utterly fucking shit, it's unreal. There's so many times where I tried locking onto an enemy and the game just wouldn't do it. The worst case I have is this helicopter fight near the end of the game where it constantly moves back and forth out of bounds in the stage, and you're only able to lock onto this thing about 70% of 30% of the time. This is made worse with the fact that it has so much fucking health. There are enemies that spawn in the level as you move forward to try and hit the fucking helicopter that spawn in tanks, and also tanks that spawn in bigger enemies that will just fucking kill you. And also you have to fight 2 of these fucking things. One complaint I see people have with the original Gungrave is that the game doesn't really tutorialize you. Like most games back on the PS2, you have to read the manual to see what the controls did or what you could do in the game. Overdose remedies this by having a tutorial and
ショットを確実に当てるならロックオンで狙って。ロックチェンジでロック対象を変えられるのよ。敵に近づかれたら棺桶を使って。敵に囲まれていてもまとめてなぎ倒せるわ。邪魔なものを破壊するときも。この敵はブレードでショットを弾いて防御してくるの。ランチャーを持った敵には注意して。あれを食らったら大ダメージよ。
Hey, stupid! Press the X button to jump! Hi again! Stupid! Press the square button to hit people!
While yes, you can turn the tutorials off if they annoy you, why would you ever do that for a game you just started playing? If the game has new mechanics, obviously you would want to learn them, naturally. And the game does have new mechanics as well. Overdose allows you to actually deflect rockets back and use your coffin as a shield. The shield I'd never really used at all, but being able to deflect rockets is basically essential. On top of this change, your coffin actually gets more melee moves too. There's a 3-hit combo you could do if you push the thumbsticks forward while pressing the melee button, or constantly spin it around if you're standing still. Just about any melee attack will deflect the rocket straight back to the enemy. This is a great change since all you could do against the rocket enemies in the first game is either tank the hit or just dodge out of the way. You're also able to charge up your pistols doing this heavily damaging charge shot, which can be really useful for some bosses and enemies. But the weird thing is that if you want to use that, you can't have the rapid fire option on in the menu. So you have the choice of either losing a tool in your arsenal or stick with spamming square all day. It's so strange that they would do that, like why not allow us to bind it to another button or just bind it to another button in the first place, like R2 or L2, something like that. The biggest change they made to the gameplay, I feel, is the demolition shots. The max limit of shots you can have now got cut from 9 to 4, and you can have 3 of them at a time by default. However, after every stage you complete, like the first game, depending on your score, you get an upgrade based on one of those shots. Going from levels 1 to 3, you get a different one based on which slot it's in, like a mortar strike, cannon, or even bullet time. The bullet time one doesn't get massively different upgrades, it just lasts longer for every level. Also, depending on the level of the shot you're using, it'll use between 1 to 3 of your demolition shots. As in, if you use a level 1 demolition shot, it'll only take up 1 light, but level 2 will use 2 and then onward. I think this is a good change for wanting to spice up the difficulty. Since in the original game, you basically only needed to use 2 demolition shots since they were just straight upgrades, and not have to worry about wasting them since you could hold so many at a time. The leveling system is a good change, I feel, since you have to think which one you think would be best for each encounter. I think they went a bit too far with the nerf on how many you could hold, though. Only having 4 shots really sucks since it gives you way less room to use all these cool abilities Grave has. I think maybe a 5 or 6 shot limit would have been better. On top of that, instead of being able to heal via the menu, every demolition shot you do recovers a small bit on your health, and it's dependent on how many hits you get during that demolition shot, indicated by the jackpot meter where your combo is. I think this is an outright better change, since if you want to heal, you're still in the gameplay and don't have to completely kill the pacing of what you're doing. And that makes for just about all the gameplay changes in Overdose. At its core, it's still the same game, just longer, but the main thing that holds this game back are the enemy encounters and variety. Now, the first game didn't have an insane amount of enemy variety, just different flavors of the same goon that would stand still until you shot them. In Overdose, there's actually a ton of enemy variety. The issue with that, though, is that this game has the balancing of a 2017 Hotline Miami 2 custom level. There is a shit ton of new enemy types and special enemies in this game, and they never want you to forget that fact because all they do in these levels is spam them all the fucking time. I hope you like seeing these rocket guys with shields, sword guys, and big dudes with LMGs because those are the only fucking enemies you're gonna see around the halfway point. The biggest problem is that the rocket guys can obviously block your bullets since they have shields, and so can the sword guys. They still take damage, but it's a very minuscule amount. So what the game wants you to do is to melee the sword guys and deflect the rockets back. But that'll barely ever happen since the game will, more than likely, put down 14 different fucking rocket guys surrounding you all in different elevated positions, along with another 100 normal gun guys, dividing your attention to whoever is shooting at you first, which is fucking everybody, so you get stun locked in a corner and ass fucked. And have fun trying to see where the fuck anybody even is with the horrendous amounts of motion blur and hit effects the size of the fucking sun. On top of that, this game has such a shit camera that gets stuck on everything because for some reason, every single level is a fucking minuscule corridor with a bunch of shit in the way that gets the camera stuck. You do have camera control now, unlike the first game, but it might as well not exist since it's not actual camera control. It only lets you look around Grave, which it's basically unusable. The first game not having camera control wasn't that big of an issue since, other than exactly one level in the game where the camera could get stuck on the walls, every single level were large enough hallways so you could get a good look at where everyone is. Overdose's level design is so fucking bad, it all feels like it was pulled from a game with better shooting mechanics than this one. The second level has you go into a supermarket where you have to fight a gang leader to get more information on who's redistributing seed, the drug from the first game. You fight guys for like 5 straight minutes and for some reason, enemies just stopped spawning, and I was stuck sitting there. I thought my game bugged out so I couldn't progress. I randomly just started shooting the environment thinking it would trigger something that would happen, and by destroying this one shelf on some random fucking corner of the level, enemies started spawning again, and I could progress. The game doesn't tell you this is what you're supposed to do. The level before this had indicators of what objects you're meant to destroy to progress, except this one. If I had a quarter for every time an action game had a level set in a supermarket that doesn't have any music in it and goes on for way too fucking long, constantly spawning in waves of enemies to kill, I'd have 2, which ain't a lot, but it's crazy that it happened twice. I think the worst levels in this game are probably the mansion level and the docks level. The docks is bad because the game requires you to do fucking platforming on these crates to progress. And the game spawns in a shit ton of rocket guys that are just out of your reach, so it's harder to hit them. The level is also so fucking claustrophobic that the camera gets stuck, and for some reason, the game puts in forklifts with suicide bombers behind them to block your way, meaning that you have to destroy both the forklift, kill the suicide bomber, and use the dog shit jumping controls to even get over the forklift to progress the level. The original game also had a jump button, but the only time you ever used it was exactly once, and you could just dodge roll over it anyways. Why put in fucking platforming sections in a game that doesn't get anything out of them when they clearly kill the pace of the game? The boss of this level actually requires you to do platforming to even damage him, along with spawning enemies on top of you and mortars that explode after a certain amount of time, while shooting rockets at you that knock you off the platform. The mansion is bad because of look at how many fucking rocket guys they put into just the beginning room. Yeah, you can just spam melee to deflect them back, but enemies still rush towards you, usually bigger ones. And later in the level, the game has turrets that have a shit ton of health that you also have to worry on top of the rocket guys. I swear to God, most of the enemies in this game are just different variants of these fucking rocket launcher enemies. It felt like that was the only enemy I was ever fighting. On top of that, the game very often spawns enemies behind you or right in front of you as you're walking. The first game did this maybe like 3 times in total, but it was always whenever you were in a position that you could defend yourself. In Overdose, it does it all the fucking time. So you're always overwhelmed and surrounded by enemies, meaning you have to run around dodging them all the time so you don't eat shit all the fucking time. The fact they nerfed the shield to take maybe 5 hits before breaking on a good day doesn't help either. It's basically useless in this game. It takes 6 business days to charge, even out of combat. And the game takes a real fucking long time to decide whether you're in combat or not. Compare this to the first game where the shield takes literal seconds to recharge, even in combat. Initially I thought if you put the coffin down like a shield it'll recharge faster, but that isn't the case. It really does just take that long. So if you ever do decide to play this game, I hope you enjoy having basically no shield the entire time. One other thing about this game is that you get knocked down all the fucking time by every single thing. You take forever to get up whenever you get knocked down, and you don't have the very generous amount of iframes as you did in the first game, so you could reset yourself and get your footing on what's going on. A problem that's worsened with how just terrible the screen shake is. This game is just so much more annoying to play compared to the first, and all of this culminates into just being so fucking boring. Since this game is now 9 stages long, dragged out to 6 hours in length, meaning every level just takes forever to finish, and for some reason, there is no music for a majority of all the levels. I thought my copy was bugged, like the version of the game I got had this bug that wouldn't play the music at all, like maybe something went wrong with the undub patch that I downloaded for this game. But I checked several long plays online, and no, the game is just like that. For about every single level of this game, the only thing you're going to be hearing are grunts, explosions, and gunfire, with basically no reverb or ambience of what's going on. So this game just feels so lifeless and dead, like nothing has ever happened. It's not even like the music in this game is bad. The few tracks that do play are actually really good. Again, all composed by Sueno Imahori. Although granted, I do think most of the tracks are just reused from the first game. It just baffles me though that they'd only play it during cutscenes, the hideout in between missions, and boss fights. It felt so draining to play this game because of it and made the entire experience feel so boring and so much longer than it actually is. On the topic of boss fights, there are a lot more in this game, and I think I had fun with maybe one of them. That being the Bungie rematch you have near the end of the game, which is followed up by a much worse boss fight with Sherry, who you will only know if you've watched the anime, followed up by another way fucking worse boss fight after that. Sherry was Harry's wife, who he began dating her at the age of 15 years old, and she wants revenge against Grave for killing both Harry and her father, who was a boss in the first game. I feel like the one gimmick every boss in this game has is that they always have a move where you can't attack or hit them. Whether they leave the area or have a move that just gives them a shit ton of iframes, the arenas are also usually never big enough for you to have a decent fight with them, and have little to no environments or even cover to them. It's mostly just one flat room with nothing in it. There's this one boss fight that's actually a rematch of all three Millennium leaders combined into one, which it looks cool as shit, but for the first phase of the fight, all you're doing is spending about 45 minutes each trying to destroy 4 different cores that allows him to regenerate after you kill him. So you're constantly jumping back and forth trying to keep him at bay and spamming bullet time so you can actually damage the fucking cores. The second phase is actually kind of unique though, since you're doing more than just shooting endlessly. One feature Overdose has for most of the boss fights is the ability to actually shoot different body parts. This boss's main gimmick is specifically using that. You're able to knock it off the elevator here, making it hang from it. But if you shoot the hand it's using to hold onto the elevator, you'll knock him off completely, causing him to lose a shit ton of health. That is the only positive I can think of though, since the actual fight is pretty fucking bad. All this fucking dude does is just jump around and set out suicide bombers to kill you, and with the constant screen shake, it's so hard to actually keep track of what's happening. I think for about 70% of this game, you're also constantly just fighting stupid shit like tanks, helicopters, fucking forklifts, and you have a boss fight against 2 front loaders. Genuinely, I don't understand how they took a universe like Gungrave, where you can go just about anywhere with the ideas and build more unique fights and encounters that you can write into the story. Like, you could put fucking Grave anywhere and it'll make sense. But why am I fighting fucking helicopters and front loaders, dude? I said this earlier, but I think the only fight I genuinely enjoyed was the Bungie rematch. His fight plays basically identical to the first, but he has much more moves at his disposal, and the arena is designed suited for his new powers, since he is a superior Orgman now, as he went through necrolization like Grave did. And he is the only fight in the game where he doesn't just do stupid bullshit against you the whole time. The most bullshit move that he has are these like ghost wolves that he throws at you that act as suicide bombers, but you can kill them with one shot, and they basically do nothing to you. He is much more challenging than he was in the first game and now sports a much larger health bar, making this feel like a much more even fight. It also reuses his theme from the first game, which is Kino as fuck, but I do wish they at the very least remix it for this rematch. He also just looks fucking cool. All this game does is just further prove that Bungie is one of the coolest motherfuckers in gaming, dude. I guess now would be a good time for me to actually mention the story of Overdose, since I've ranted about this game's gameplay for about 8 pages now. Overdose is set 3 years after the events of the first game. Mika is trying to reawaken Grave as someone by the name of Garino Crescione has started redistributing the drug Seed from the first game. Seed is now being developed to give people greater powers and the ability to become Orgmen themselves. Grave coming back in the coolest fucking way possible, him and Mika meet up with Spike. Mika having met with him years ago and him helping her out with all the tech stuff in their mobile base, and Mika acting as a bigger sister to him. After the first stage, you also meet up with 2 other DEADMEN, Ryuji Kabane and, I shit you not, Rocket Billy Red Cadillac. Genuinely the coolest fucking name you could give a character in, like, anything. Juji being a blind zombie with dual gun swords, and Billy being the ghost of a rock star who is haunting a guitar. Juji and Billy have their own reasons for going after Garino, but they decide to join Grave and Mika since they might have a better chance of getting close to him. The game's story is kind of just badly paced, I feel. The whole game you're just finding mafia leaders to kill to get closer to Garino until stage 7 where Grave, Juji, and Billy all team up to storm Garino's castle in a pretty cool setup to the stage. It felt like you basically did nothing in the game until that final third of it, and nobody ever really develops until that point either. Mika now acts as the handler for each mission, along with Spike, but neither of them really do anything in the game or even develop. Grave literally can't develop as he doesn't talk. All Juji does is just act like a fucking asshole to everyone, and Spike especially because he has this tick in the back of his mind that he doesn't want to trust Spike since he feels he'd betray the group. But it's not like he trusted Mika or Grave in the first place. Almost every conversation with Juji starts with them doing this annoying loud-ass fucking sound every single time he talks. And all he does is just yell at Spike saying shit like, "The grown-ups are talking, shouldn't you be in bed?" or some fucking shit. Then Mika always has to step in to defuse the argument that's going on. And Billy is a cardboard cutout standing in the corner of the room until he decides to get up and say some surface level shit, or also try to stop Juji from beefing with a fucking 12-year-old. Every single mission is basically the exact same setup with different flavors of, we have to get to the end of this section so we can interrogate this guy. Except for one level where you go down to Chinatown that starts with the gang shooting up the place in a cutscene so they can get information from the Triad leader. Instead of killing him though, the Triad leader actually tells them where Garino's mansion is and to go there next, but his men storm the place so you have to escape. This and Stage 7 being the only ones that have an actually unique setup to them. The game's story is presented in these visual novel type cutscenes, which do a fine job on their own. I just wish it didn't use the CG cutscene models for their sprites because they just look so odd, making the presentation look kinda cheap. I think it would have been nicer to have actual illustrations done by Nightow himself for these bits, but it might just be a budget cut or a time restraint reason as to why it's not the case. They do try and make these cutscenes somewhat more visually interesting by making the portraits move across the screen to convey whatever they're doing, but it just looks so weird and cheap. I would have personally been fine if they were just regular visual novel styled cutscenes or if they just had better looking portraits. Each cutscene kind of just drags on for way longer than they should, telling you what you could be told in 3 minutes in 7. This game doesn't even have a bad story at all, it just doesn't tell it in an interesting way. It over-explains things and doesn't give itself time to develop any of its concepts or any characters. Again, you will only know the importance of Sherry if you've seen the anime. With how long this game takes for it to get interesting and how little explains itself for things that should matter, it really does bring down to several decent story beats and character moments that this game does have, like the stuff with Mika and Spike or with Grave. Shit like the Bungie rematch or even everything at the end with the big twist is all great. I just wish they had better character moments other than like, hey guys, we have to go over here if we want to find the next syndicate guy.
Stop it, you fucking piece of shit! Snot-nosed brat! I will fucking rip your head open from your goddamn eye sockets! You fucking piece of shit!
I am 12 years old. The way this game ends is pretty fucking nuts though, at least from a story standpoint. On a gameplay front, the last level and final boss are probably the worst I've experienced in a game. Before the level starts, we're clued in on what happened during stages 7 and 8, since during that, Grave lost contact with Juji, Mika, and Spike. As it turns out, they were found by Fangarem, and all of them were nearly killed. He spared Spike, but nobody can really guess as to why. Spike leaves the group, but before he does, he tries to save Mika's life by injecting her with seed. It does save her, granted, in a couple hours she is gonna turn into an Orgman. So the group makes chase after Spike sends them a transmission of where he's going, which is after Garino. Mid-stage, you meet up with Spike, who explains his reasoning for injecting Mika with seed, stating that he never had bad intentions or wanted to harm Mika, it's just that it was the only way to save her, knowing that she could, at the very least, fight off the infection for at least a couple hours. He also tells us that he's a clone of Garino, which explains why Juji had this suspicion of him the entire game. Garino wanted a second in command, but he also wanted one that was just as smart as him. Spike obviously hated being used by Garino since he didn't have any freedom of his own, so he escaped and started plotting his revenge against him. It was then he found Mika, who took care of him and raised him like a little brother. But the reason why he stuck with Mika was because that Spike knew about Grave, citing the Billion City incident, which were the events of the first game, as something notable Grave did. So he stuck with Mika knowing that she was the only one who could control Grave. He never really cared about all the shit that Mika taught him or did for him. He even said he hated the suit that she made for him. He admits that he used the entire group to get closer to Garino just so he could kill him.
これで俺のネタばらしはおしまい。ほら、好きにしなよ。待てよ、俺は。
そうだ、一つだけ確認しなきゃならねえ。クソガキ、お前敵の手引きしたか？
いや。
ならいい。
でも
お前はガリーノじゃねえ。くせえ理由も分かった。そうでいい。
あ、そうだ。スープは一生懸命作ってたんだからね。
The group barely gives half of a shit. Now why is this last level bad? Well, for one, it takes fucking forever to beat, and you are fighting prototype Orcmen who will probably react to your gunshots when they feel like it, along with the shittiest fucking platforming section anyone could ever imagine squeezing into a third-person shooter, which is followed up by a proper fight with a dead man named Fangarim, who you see after completing the mansion stage. Fangarim's cross was actually made to coincide with Graves' dual magnums. The magnums were something Grave could handle, but the cross was something nobody could ever carry, except Fangarim. His entire existence is basically just to kill Grave. The first phase of his fight is honestly pretty cool, then goes to complete boring shit in his second, because all you do is just use demolition shots over and over again, since the only thing he does is spawning these stupid fucking pillars that you just farm combos off of. After that, you're faced with the final boss, G.O.R.E, who before you fight, you get another cutscene where he explains he got this massive fucking church organ from outer space aliens. In exchange for their technology, he agreed to spread the drug seed all over the world so the alien race could repopulate themselves. He kills Spike in the most insane fucking way possible, and Grave turns Super Saiyan, beginning the fight. The first phase I genuinely cannot fucking explain. You get infinite demolition shots for this fight and are meant to use them against the crystals in these towers around the arena. What you do is that you're meant to destroy one of the crystals that coincides with the colored shield so you can actually do damage against the organ. But 99% of the time, I was constantly slowed down to a fucking crawl since one of the crystals just happens to have the bullet time ability that you do, and I didn't realize that you could counter this by activating said demolition shot until about like a good chunk through the fight. The only reason why I beat this fight in about less than a week was because the level 3 rocket demolition shot instantly killed not only all of the crystals, but the towers you're meant to destroy. So I just waited for the demolition shot meter to charge up so I could do that 3 times and beat the fight. The second phase is probably the fucking worst. G.O.R.E is fast as shit and almost always has iframes on, along with the fact that he can also use the fucking bullet time demolition shot against you, and his movement speed isn't decreased. So I spent the entire fight trying to build up my gauge to counter it and realizing that this is going to take 10 fucking years to do since all he does is teleport around and use bullet time against you. I then realized again, I could just use the cannon demolition shot and spam that at him until he died. Sure, I didn't properly beat the final boss, but fucking I'm not doing this abysmal dog shit again, dude. This was miserable. You get to see one final demolition shot with the boys that just looks so fucking sick. You see one final cutscene with everybody as the credits roll, finishing out Gungrave Overdose. But we're not done with the game just yet. Overdose actually has a much larger amount of unlockable content you can earn, unlike the first game. For starters, you get 2 extra playable characters, G.O.R.E and Billy. Down to their core gameplay, they don't play all too differently from Grave. The only real differences is that their mid-mission dialogue is different, along with some of the cutscenes with the main bosses like Bungie. Where if you play the game as G.O.R.E and you fight him, it turns out that G.O.R.E and Bungie were actually brothers. You have to do a lot to unlock these though, like beat the game with every character, clear stage with a 999 combo, clear the game without dying, simple stuff, and also achieve 30 hours of gameplay with 300,000 shots fired, and achieve 500,000 shots fired. So as the self-respecting gamer that I am, I ever so graciously took the time out of my day to download a 100% save file on GameFAQs. The extras include a stage select, boss rush, enemy rush, a secret character toggle that puts hidden Nightow angels in each level, and once they are all destroyed, gives you access to infinite demolition shots, and even alternate costumes for each character. For Grave, it's just his original outfit from the first game, Billy becomes G.O.R.E, and G.O.R.E turns into fucking Bungie. G.O.R.E's gameplay is actually cool since he's a lot more melee focused. Instead of charging your guns up normally, you charge his attacks with the melee button, sending out several projectile sword slashes. But again, he's really no different from Grave. Billy is kinda different though. Wielding an electric guitar, he just fires lightning out in every fucking direction, looking sick as fuck, sliding around like an actual rock star while doing it. It seems like the game's auto-aim was better designed for him in mind, since for Grave it does whatever the fuck it wants. People say that Billy kinda saves this game, and as much as I want to agree, I really can't. This game isn't irredeemably bad at all, no, it's got a lot of great ideas and moments to it. But with everything on top with issue after issue, I just can't imagine myself playing this game again. It's not the worst sequel I've played, but it's definitely up there. I just hate saying that kind of shit though. You can tell the developers really cared about the game and Nightow as a creator, wanting to make a proper follow-up to such a unique title. I'd imagine a lack of budget and time issues were the main reason why the game feels so half-finished and rushed. Again, it's not like this game is all bad, there is a ton of good here, just that it didn't have enough time to properly develop them better. But hey, Gungrave isn't entirely dead. There is G.O.R.E that came out just recently, it still gets updates and DLC to this day. The most recent one coming out a couple weeks ago and actually lets you play as Billy. But really, no matter what, this is always gonna be a series that stays niche, which isn't a bad thing. These games only have the kind of attention that'll grab most people that can appreciate smaller, weirder titles like this. I wouldn't say with Overdose specifically that I wasted my time either. I'm still glad I got to play through this game, but man, do I wish it was better. I do plan on playing G.O.R.E eventually. It looks fun, and from what I've seen, it gets updated constantly. Clearly the developers care a lot about the IP and have passion to make it the best it can be, which is something I greatly respect. It's endearing to see smaller game developers update and patch a game over and over again for its players, even if it's only a small amount of people. You don't really see that kind of stuff nowadays since AA games are much less of a common thing than they were back in the day. I say this while Slitterhead just came out a couple days ago as I'm writing this. All I'm trying to say is that we need more games like Gungrave. More niche experimental stuff that appeals to the most specific target demographic. That's the kind of shit I'm here for. Anyways, yeah. Kino Grave, I feel.
Where that girl gets hit by the car and then she's like, it would be
get a fucking
to buy
grenade?
vegetables here.
Grenade out!
Anytime anything happens in this game, it has to lag.
Grenade out!